Welcome to the Cryllionaire podcast, hosted by Jeremy Britton and with the co-host me, Kevin Wojton. We are here chatting today in an open forum about prevailing trends in crypto, everything that you wanted to learn, everything that you need to know, and how to navigate the crypto landscape. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. We did have a guest lined up today, but guest hasn't showed, and that's okay. First week of January, we've had a couple of people, even for investor calls, that haven't shown up. That's okay. People haven't really started the 2025 calendar yet in their heads. Some of the people will still be signing and dating documents 2024 for the next month, and that's okay. That's okay. We'll catch them next time.
Yeah, well, as we know, the it always comes twice as much in January than it was previous. Everyone's back at the market. I looked at my emails this morning and I was like, holy cow, everyone who was supposed to respond to my emails in the last 2 weeks just responded today. My calendar is like booked up today all the way until the end of the month already. And I was like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into, So, hats off to a good 2025.
I got some really good advice from this guy. Like my calendar was booked up solid a couple of weeks ago. Oh, pretty well from end of October right through to like middle of December, and I was having like 15, 16 Zoom calls a day. And this guy said to me, "Why don't you have group Zoom calls? If they're all asking you the same questions, you could have like two calls a day and have like four or 10 people on each call." I mean, that's brilliant advice. And I did that, and it's just changed my life. And I've shared that advice with several other professional speakers and friends of mine, and they're going, "Oh my God, that's groundbreaking."
Was that guy me?
It was, yes.
I was like, yeah. Well, I find that a lot with a lot of professionals is that if you don't value your time, you lose,
Yeah.
right? The most valuable resources are time. And I raised lots of money in my career. And, if you have calls from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with individuals, you get aphasia. Like you
Mm.
can't remember the calls, you don't know, you try to write notes, you try to follow up, but it just really is impossible to keep up, mentally. Like if you have more than 4 calls in a day,
Yeah.
your day's shot. You have no mental energy. I used to do calls from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. when I was a founder, raising money. And it's just, you got to take care of your mental health first because, on those calls, you can follow up, and weed people out pretty quickly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was getting to the stage where I'd get an email from someone, and they'd be confirming their deposit. We've just put money in, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. We want this, 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 this. And I've got no recollection of their name. Like the name didn't even look familiar to me. And because
Yeah.
we do KYC, we do AML, and they'd send through their photo ID, and I'd be looking at the photo ID and go, I swear to God, I've never seen that face before in my life. But then I can go back and check through the calendar and the call records and go, oh yeah, I totally had a meeting with those guys like 4 days ago.
Yeah.
Not remember it. So it's
Yeah.
just too much overwhelm.
What I think the best thing is doing is setting up a good process
Mm,
when you're talking to people. My process is always every Friday I have no calls and I go through my calendar and I make sure that everyone I talk to, I put a notebook next to me, and
mm.
every time I talk to someone, I write their name and then two bullet points of who they are and what the follow-up is. And on every Friday, I will go through my notebook and say, okay, here's 15 people that I talked to. I have no memory of any of it, like
Yeah,
none,
yeah, yeah.
right? So then I'll reach out to them, but then I got them because, I was set up a good process.
Mm, mm. I mean, Fathom has been brilliant, as far as like automatic call recording and note taking. So yeah, I might have had a half-hour call with this person, and I can't remember it because I had 16 calls that day and 16 calls the previous day.
Yeah.
But I can go into Fathom and go, oh, talked about this, talked about this. Oh, cool. Now I understand. And in 90 seconds, I can get the
That's
whole 30-minute dialogue. So it's perfect.
Does it do like an AI summary?
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh, that's cool.
like obviously, you'd be aware of YouTube doing the transcriptions when you talk, and occasionally it stuffs the words up,
Yeah.
particularly when you're using jargon and crypto and that sort of stuff. But because Fathom does the gist of it, it summarizes it. It can basically ignore the words that it's transcribed incorrectly, and get it in the context and go, oh, they were talking about the weather, or they were talking about the time zone, or they were talking about previous investments they've had, without actually being really specific about what they were. And then you go, oh, that actually triggers it for me. At least I know. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I love
So
Fathom.
speaking
They're not a sponsor of the show, but we have invested into Fathom. Bought some stock in Fathom. It's fantastic. If you haven't used it, try it out.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of advice, what advice would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Man. Um, yes. That's an interesting question. At 18, obviously, I was young and dumb and full of hope for the future. But mostly I was just chasing girls. I was also full of testosterone. Um, and I spent a lot of money on going out, spent a lot of money on, you know, having a fancy car with a fancy stereo because apparently girls like that. Um, but I saved nothing, invested nothing,
Yeah.
and some of my friends had. Some of my friends, they were brought up differently to me. I mean, I'd never heard of stocks and shares when I was 18, and didn't learn that until after I left home. But some of my friends had parents who had things like that. And a couple of my mates, when they were at university, they actually had investments. And occasionally they'd cash out a little bit of their shares because they'd want to go and eat meat rather than eating 2-minute noodles or whatever. So yeah, 18-year-old self, I'd say invest in something, whatever
Yeah.
it is, something for the long haul. Because eventually, after chasing all of these girls around, I was going to settle down with one of them, and they want stability. I want to be
Yeah.
able to have a family and have a house and not be sort of renting a place and moving around every 6 months or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
how about
My
you?
advice is exactly the same. There's a famous author called Benjamin Graham who wrote a book called Intelligent Investor.
Mm,
And his whole thing, and it's what Warren Buffett swears by, is that exact thing, is that it's not about picking the right stocks, it's about time and market. So I wish when I was 18, I told myself, because he says put 50% of all your earnings into the stock market. 50% in cash, 50% in the stock market. So while I was working, I should have put $200 in every month.
mm,
I think I saw something that, if you put in $5,000 at the age of 18 every month and stop by the age of 25 versus starting at 25 and put $500 in, it'll take you 3 times as long. By the end of 10, 15 years, you'll have more money, in the first case. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
I remember reading Benjamin Graham's Intelligent Investor at 17 and being like, oh, this is a great idea, but I didn't do it. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, this makes like a lot of sense. This is a great book. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And I was the idiot, and I had the advice that I wish I told myself earlier, when I was 18 is don't worry about stuff. You know what I mean? I think when you're so young, you're trying to hustle and it's all about simplicity, calm, placid, creating a safe space for mental. I was always, you know, working jobs and trying to make money to pay for college and, do all this other stuff. And I was always broke and I was always stressed and I was always
Mm,
broke and I was stressed. And it just created this awful cycle. And then when I got my first job in New York City working in investment banking, I started investing. I actually invested in Bitcoin in 2011 uh, at Mount Gox. I don't know if you remember that
yeah, yeah.
platform. And they got hacked, and I lost almost all my Bitcoins.
Mm, mm,
So, lessons learned is, I sold them for some profit or whatever. But if I just would have listened to that book, it's just read that book, Intelligent Investor. The big takeaway is put 50% of your earnings in stocks.
mm,
And always, you always want to invest in high growth stocks and do low risk and diversify. I remember I put in, I was invested $5,000 in Netflix, $5,000 in Facebook, $5,000 in Google, pick, put some money, 10% in risky assets, 90% in stable,
Mm,
and it compounds, right? Warren Buffett's, he says the greatest miracle in the world is compounding interest. And I
mm,
was laughing too. Like I read all this stuff, and it wasn't until like 5 years ago that I like did the math and I was like, oh wait, if you bought it 10 years ago and if it goes up 5% today,
mm.
that's 40% a day on your original investment. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. Important lessons, time in the market, dollar cost averaging, as you say, putting in $500 a month or even, $10 a month or whatever you can afford. There's some apps out there that'll even let you put in like 50 cents a day. So Raiz, RAIZ, and Acorns, I think are a couple of ones that I've used in the past, which are quite good for saving. But whatever amount you can afford to set aside and let that grow. The other thing is
Yeah.
investing where you spend. So, I love Fathom. I use Fathom. I think I'm going to continue to use it. So I invest in that and I tell other people about it. It's because I think it's good. And whether you like, if you drive a Toyota and you love your Toyota and you think that everybody should drive Toyotas because Toyotas are fantastic or whatever it is, then maybe you should invest in that. There's some people out there who they're still driving the same make of car, but 5 models later.
Yeah.
Like you've had a particular car for the last 10 years, but you just keep changing and you keep using the same brand. If you love it, whether it's coffee, whether it's cars, whether it's razor blades, whatever you
Mhm.
love and whatever you spend money on, you should be investing into that because it's good. And if the quality drops off, obviously, if they start using cheaper ingredients or cheaper parts, then you'd probably stop using that and you'd pull your money back out. I was one of the first users of Netflix back in the day when Netflix would
Mm.
actually mail you a DVD
Yeah.
in the mail. It was mail order movies, because I used to get the tight ass Tuesdays on the way home from work. You'd pick up a new release video from Blockbuster, and it was $2 instead of $7.95 or whatever it was. But then if you
Yeah.
didn't take it back the next day, you got a fine. And you got to find the next day, and you got to find the next day. And my fine
Yeah.
started to add up, and it was like $40 for one movie that I
Right.
didn't take back because I kept forgetting. And then Netflix, there was literally a flyer in my mailbox, came out and said, "Hey, no late fees ever again." I was like, "Oh my God, that's fantastic." Hit me at the right time. And all I had to do was just type in on the internet like 2 movies that I wanted to watch. They would mail them to me. And then I wouldn't get the next 2 movies until I mailed back the disc. I was spending money on Netflix, but I didn't follow my own advice and I didn't invest in Netflix way back
Yeah,
when it was a
exactly.
brand new company.
And that's the key, right? And the last advice I'd give to my 18-year-old self is that you got to trick your brain chemistry. You got to create incentive rewards around doing good things, right? Like, if you go out and party and do all that stuff, which is fine, you can do that. But if that's your reward function, you're gonna develop habits around those things, whether it's you have to create these reward functions of feeling good about putting money in the stock market, right? Feeling good about, putting money away, right? Because when you're young, you're like, oh, I got 5 grand, I'm rich. Like, heck yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
But you got to reverse that and you got to hack your own brain. You got to say, okay, brain, I'm not going to throw this into, you know, throwing it away. I'm going to make it so that I get those endorphins from investing
Mm,
and you got
mm,
to make it a habit, right? And then you got to say, okay, my hobby is stock investing, right?
yeah.
And just really do that because I know when you're younger, that's the last thing on your mind is not having the money to spend. But
Mm,
it's addictive. I mean, consumer spending is very addictive, and so is buying things on Amazon. And as Socrates once said, is you are what you do, right? So if you buy a lot of stuff, you're going to be broke. If you
mm,
don't buy a lot of stuff and live underneath your means and do good fundamentals, you'll be wealthy and you'll be able to retire and have a wife and kids. And, it's like, that's it. And your wife won't be very happy if you have a bunch of stuff over long-term investments. That's for sure.
garage full of collectible action figures or something. Yeah, but if you're going
Yeah,
to be spending money on Amazon, hey, why not buy some stock in Amazon? You know, if that's your thing,
that's right.
because it
Yeah,
would have been good to buy some stock in Amazon back in the day. You know.
yeah. So speaking of the market, I know we're mostly a crypto podcast, but what are your predictions for 2025?
If well, I always try and predict the future by looking back at the past. And
Yeah,
you look at any new government coming in. New government doesn't want to come in on day one and say, "Hey, we're introducing new taxes, and we're going to do this, and we're going to have austerity measures." That's not a way to get very popular on day one, and that's a sure way to make sure you get voted out. So
yeah,
usually, when a new government comes in, they try to stimulate the economy. They print a bit of cash, and that means printing cash or lowering the interest rates to make people feel like they've got more money, and then people might go and spend more on consumer goods like Amazon or wherever they're spending, and then Amazon stock will go up, right? Which is great for all the stockholders. The consumer economy is different to the investor economy. Right, the top of the pyramid is very
yeah,
different. The top of the pyramid is very happy that the government's printing cash because their assets go up. And if you look at the last few years since the pandemic, when the governments or the Reserve Bank started printing a lot of cash, real estate prices have gone ballistic, stock prices have gone ballistic, crypto
yeah,
prices have gone ballistic, whilst the Reserve Banks were printing cash. And the normal consumer's like, hey, I can go out and buy a flat screen TV. And the people at the top of the pyramid are going, well, my house has gone up by 40% in value. My stock portfolio
yeah,
has gone up by 40% in value. So I think we're going to see that at least for the first 12 months, where they want to stimulate the economy and make it look like you made a good decision. Voting us in, you made a good decision. But the other thing is, of course, the new government says, hey, we're going to be pro crypto, because there were a lot of companies, some of our peers who were leaving the US and choosing to domicile in Asia, in Dubai or in Singapore or in Hong Kong, because of what was going on with the SEC and Gary Gensler. So now that there's a pro crypto movement across the US, I can see a lot more companies starting up and saying, hey, it's now it's beneficial. So that's going to help the economy as well. That's going to lift the market, because there'll be new companies coming in, new ideas saying it's okay for us now to do business in this country.
yeah. I agree. I also think there's going to be a lot of volatility in these first half of 2025. If you look at PE ratios, they're higher than they were during the dot-com bubble.
Right.
And not that they're going to go down. I think we're still going to have a bull market. Like you said, there's going to be cash infusions. People are very happy, but I think you're going to see a lot of volatility. So the VIX index, is going to be a very interesting play. You'll
Mm.
see crypto, Bitcoin pop up and down from 100K to 90,000, 93,000,
Yeah.
over the next like 3, 4 months for sure. I don't think the bull run is over, but holy cow, the last 2 years, my portfolio has gone up 30, 40%, and I wasn't even trying. So, any pullback, as long as you're in the market,
Mm.
you can be doing pretty good. So,
Yeah.
we'll see how the future holds. I think the AI hype train has really revolutionized the way businesses can scale. And
Mhm.
so, like we saw the internet bubble scale it up. It was probably a little bit of overhype,
Yeah.
but I do think there's long-term efficiencies at a company level that are reducing costs and increasing price to earnings ratios, permanently
Mm.
based on, long-term holdings, right?
Yeah. I mean, the dot-com bubble, for those kids who weren't around to enjoy that, uh, was a lot of hype. There was companies changing their name and just putting .com on the end of it, to pretend they were an internet company, and that saw their shares go up. I think Google stock rose from $10 to about $140 within a matter of a couple of months. It was
Yeah.
crazy, and because it was fluff and hype, 80% of those companies, 80% of those companies aren't around anymore. Um, but it did give us some really good companies. Like, it was possibly the resurrection of Apple. Apple had gone down by about 80% prior to that.
Hmm.
Obviously, we did get Amazon, which an online bookstore, like who's going to buy that? But it also gave us YouTube and Facebook and a few other companies that actually did survive. And like if you'd thrown $100 at 100 different companies back then, 90% of that money you would have lost. But out of the
Yeah.
four or five, the FANG stocks now that are so famous, you would have well made your money back. I think there's a lot of companies out there who are saying, "Oh, we've got AI to do this," and I've actually used some of them. And turns out when you look behind the scenes, it wasn't AI, and AI was actually Indians, because this guy who said, "Oh, we're using AI to send out marketing messages and that sort of stuff," it was being copied and pasted by some guys in India. Like he was literally outsourcing it for $5. Um,
Are humans artificial intelligence?
no, they're actual intelligence. Um, but these
I
guys
don't
did
know.
the same.
It's just a collection of synapses and electrical nodes that are running in parallel. You know what I mean?
I'd
A
say I'd still
series
say
of
natural
weighted.
rather than artificial. But yeah,
I
there's
don't know. We got rocks. We got rocks to think to become computers. So I don't think getting neurons to think to become intelligence. I don't know. You know what I mean?
there's a lot of lies. There's a lot of fluff, and there's a lot of people
Yeah.
who are pretending things. I mean, even with the blockchain, when Bitcoin, I think it was 2017 when Bitcoin went from $1,000 to about $20,000, and the what was it, the Long Island iced tea company in the US changed their name from Long Island iced tea to Long Island blockchain, and their shares like went up about 600% until the SEC went, "Hey, look, you can't do that." They hadn't changed the nature of their business. They hadn't changed how they were doing anything. They just changed their name to
Yeah.
jump on the hype bandwagon. So there's going to be a lot of fallout
Yeah.
from this. I think there'll be a lot of companies that disappear because it's just fluff. But Ben Graham was always saying, buy quality at a discount, right? So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly right. Find companies with large economic moats, right? And I think companies like OpenAI, you're going to see a commoditization of LLMs. Anthropic and Claude, in my opinion, is way better than OpenAI at this point. When they first came out, Sam Altman was like, "Oh, we're going to be the top AI company." Now you got seven.
yeah,
Next year you're gonna have 14, and then after, you're the first mover usually is in a good position for a while. But if your only edge is not, they don't have any economic moat. Their edge
mm.
was talent moat or processing mode. And as GPUs came out at scale, now the newest NVIDIA, like that was the miss, right? NVIDIA, right? So, as those processing moats decrease, you're not going to have as much competitive advantage as as you would. So I always laugh, like what you said, I've talked to so many people, they're like, "Oh, we're a blockchain company." And they're like, "We're a blockchain for video games. We're a blockchain for banking." And I'm like, "Bro, no bank would ever want to use blockchain for that. Like if you understand the actual technology, it's like nobody wants their information public. Nobody wants to see where all their money's going publicly.
Mm.
It's like the only ones applications I think are great for blockchain, and correct me if I'm wrong, one would be something like voting,
Mm-hmm.
currencies. I don't really think there's a ton of applications. I've seen a million video game blockchain startups come out and they're like, check out this video game. It's all blockchain. It's like, yeah, but blockchain is just a database,
Yeah.
right? It's just a way to store data. Like, why wouldn't you just use a Postgres database that's centrally ran? They're like, oh, because that can be hacked. And it's like, well, you know, banks been using Postgres. They've been using centralized databasing, and they want to have their control over their data, right?
Mm.
Because that's what most companies want. That's what you pay them for, right? And so having exposed data is never like there's not a profit motivation like Bitcoin, for an example. You don't make money off of owning the protocol,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Make money off of holding the asset, which is which is an interesting piece. I saw the blockchain hype die pretty strong, but now all those people who were running blockchain startups are now running pseudo AI companies, you know?
Chasing after the next big thing. And I'm sure we've all got that relative or that friend from high school who used to be in Amway, and then they went to Herbalife, and then they went to NutriBoost, and then they're always chasing the next big thing
Yeah.
in multi-level
And,
marketing. And like, you just need
and
to
you got to
jump out of
appreciate
that
the
hamster
hustle.
wheel.
You got
That
to
hamster
appreciate
wheel
the
goes
hustle.
nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you're working hard, banging your head against the same brick wall 1,000 times, like, after a while, you just start to realize maybe you're not so smart. But I'd
Yeah,
probably disagree with you a little bit there, mate, saying that the traditional banks may like to use blockchain because obviously, if you transfer $5 to me from your account on, like, Friday morning, I might not get that until Tuesday, right? Because of the banking business hours. And also the cost to transfer internationally is probably more than the amount that you're actually sending. Whereas obviously the blockchain can do it instantly, irreversibly, tracked at both ends, well, not instantly, but maybe within 10 minutes. Um, as for privacy, I mean, this was something we thought about a while back with the digital licenses, because you carry your driver's license, and say you're a pretty young thing who's going into a nightclub, and you have to show your driver's license to prove that you're old enough to go into the nightclub, and you hand over your license. The creepy bouncer now knows your name and your date of birth and your home address, right? They didn't really need
right.
to know all of that stuff. They just needed to know that you're old enough to get into the nightclub. So with the digital licenses, there's different permissions on there. And so if you need to prove you're over 21, you click this button and you just show the person, yes, I'm over 21. If you're pulled over by the police, you need to show this. But, you could actually show different sections. So I'm thinking with the banks, they might be able to implement a semi-private transaction where it can be traced. So I know that I've sent money to you, but maybe you know the amount and I know the amount, but no one else knows the amount. I'm not a
Yeah.
coder.
Well,
I
so
don't know
that's
how that would
that's
work.
I feel like that's more of a currency application than a banking application. You know what I mean?
How do you
Which
draw the distinction?
blockchain, I would say that like, banks as a institution, they have many different functions. The main thing banks don't do, is I mean, you can transfer money from your account to someone else's, but that's still a currency application, right? So, someone takes $5 and I send it to you, that's not going through the banks, that's going through a wire transfer, an ACH, which has nothing to do with banks.
Mm-hmm. How many people are aware of
So
that?
I don't know, not that many.
And how many people know about Postgres?
Hopefully, after this podcast, many more.
You're going to get 10 phone calls after this saying, can you explain it to me? Can you make a little video and run through
Yeah.
that? So,
Yeah. And I would say that, relative to new technologies, you should
mm,
definitely try to embrace them and be open-minded. Like what you just said is really important. The biggest problem of being young or being intelligent is thinking you're smart, right? The other advice I'd give my 18-year-old self is ask for advice.
mm,
Make a board, find five people that love you and ask for their advice and follow it, right? I think my biggest problem when I was young, oh, I got this job in banking right out of college, best job working in New York City. Oh, I know what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And I stopped asking for advice and I thought I was smart. And I made so many mistakes. I went through a breakup and then I moved to China. I spent too much money and, I got a job living in Hong Kong. But looking back, I was like, shit, I should have just married that girl and invested that money. Like, what was I
mm,
doing? You know what I
mm.
mean? So, and, I think the reality is that once you think you're smart, you're done. You're absolutely done. You're
Yeah.
you're 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 going down a path of value destruction rather than value creation. If you think you're stupid,
Mm.
you're on the right track. Like you're going the right way. So,
I heard a good
in my
line the other day, because obviously, by the time you're 18, 21, you think you know everything. And there's 40-year-olds who are going, you don't know shit. And you're like, you're old fashioned. You don't know. I grew up
they
in
don't
the new
know.
generation, blah, blah, blah. But someone said to me the other day, like, life would be pretty freaking boring if you had all the answers by the time you were 40 or 50, because there'd be nothing new to learn. There'd be no point living beyond that age. And I just went, wow, that's some old school wisdom. I mean, Warren Buffett's 94 freaking years old. I'm sure he's still learning new things.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I also read a really interesting quote from Donald Trump of all people, which was, he said something really interesting that was like, someone asked him, "What was the smartest thing you've ever done?" And he said, "I never smoked a cigarette. I never drank any alcohol. I never smoked weed. I never did any of that." And they were like, "Why was that the smartest thing you ever done?" He's like, "Your brain is so important
Mm,
that if you cloud your judgment, if you go through life and, make your drink 3 times a week, heavily, like you're going to lose your ability to make critical decisions. If you smoke weed, like you're going to end up it impairs your judgment. You don't think
mm.
long term. It really impacts you in a way that, and like, to each their own, right? Moderation is key, but
Even as
if you
you're
do
saying that, I'm
anything,
thinking the Beatles smoked a lot of weed. Steve Jobs took a lot of acid and became visionary. Sure, each to their own, as you
yeah,
say.
yeah. Well, okay. So if you're a musician or whatever, like maybe that's a little different. But the Beatles also had dedication.
Yeah,
They were
true,
there working in clubs in Germany 15 hours a day for 5 years.
true.
They weren't there. They surrounded themselves with really smart people. The Beatles weren't the band. The Beatles was, the manager who did weed. You know what I mean? Like there
Mm-hmm.
was someone there making some really good decisions for them. Steve Jobs, definitely again, he definitely I think it's important to have good experiences, but you got to be mindful that your brain, it degrades over time.
Yeah,
Most people they if there I read a quote the other day that every genius made their discovery in their early 20s.
right. Okay.
Yeah, like Albert Einstein published his three golden papers when he was 22, 23,
Mm,
21.
mm.
Steve Jobs did his thing when he was 19. And I think your brain is so special that you just have to protect it, right? And to each their own. I'm not telling anyone what to do, of course,
I think
but
it's important what you said about the daily discipline, though, because Steve Jobs was often under fire for working 19-hour days and sleeping under his desk, and he'd go for days without showering. His co-workers would complain about him, but he was just so focused on the goal. And as you say, the Beatles definitely did their 10,000 hours. So
yeah,
yeah, the daily discipline, which goes back to the daily discipline of putting money away. That's saving discipline, even if you only do it for 5 years and then leave it
dedicate.
for 10 years. And particularly if you're young, if there's anyone in their teens or 20s listening, do it for the years while you don't have kids, while you don't have a mortgage, while you don't have big responsibilities. Because it's
Right.
harder to do past 30. Obviously, you're on a bigger wage, but you've got more responsibilities after that, usually. So save as much as you can for as long as you can, and then if you need to take a break, that's okay.
Yeah.
While you're building your other assets, such as your children or your house, your children hopefully will look after you when you're older, or hopefully they'll go out and get really good jobs and buy you nice
Yeah.
things. Maybe that's a long-term investment. But just
Yeah.
before we wind up, I want to go back to the AI, because you said like there's like 7 companies who are doing well. Um, and maybe out of that, we'll see this kind of consolidation. Like there used to be not Netflix, Netscape Navigator. There used to be Internet Explorer. There used to be a few different browser options that you could have. There used to be a few different software options. And now it's all seemed to consolidate over time. Like I think Google Chrome's got 92% of the market share. And a
Yeah.
while back, it was Internet Explorer had about 80% of the market share. So I'm wondering, what do you think is going to happen with the top 7 AI companies? Are they going to consolidate? Are they going to cannibalize each other? And is there room for a kind of peer-to-peer artificial intelligence DAO, perhaps?
That's a loaded question. I guess I can't answer that fully, but um, I believe that AI will become more of a commodity NVIDIA recently released their newest server racks, which are about, I don't remember the exact number. I think it's like each one is like 10 times more powerful than the one 2 years ago. And so each of them are competing on compute power, not, applications. So, you know, I think as we go into this decentralized world, we're going to be moving into the next wave of AI, which you'll see a lot of it kind of be transforming legacy companies into AI enabled companies.
Hmm.
And so it's not really going to be about the fundamental technology, but rather the application of those technologies. Law firms, uh, you know, electricians, whatever it is. If I wanted to start a new business today, I would just pick up the phone and I'd go to Google and find all the electricians out there, all the people who are not utilizing AI and be that bridge and say like, hey, there's this thing called Go High Level. Hey, how are you doing outreach? Hey, oh, you don't have a website? Let me make a website for you. I think that transition of fundamental technology into the hands of the legacy users, you're just now seeing these Fortune 500 companies using multi-agent platforms. Crew.ai, I was just talking to the founder. They grew in 1 year from a concept to $300 million a year in revenue. I believe that was the number.
Yeah.
And all they did was they went to enterprise companies and were like, "Are you using multi-agent AIs to help manage your workloads?" And they're like, "No." And they're like, "All right, well, it's already been built, so let's integrate it." You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So, I
Like
think
how much
that's going to
money could
be.
this save me, or how much money could this make me?
Yeah, exactly. So it's not, I think AI is going to continue to be exciting. On our last podcast, we discussed briefly about the wall and how there's a diminishing return on value outcomes for AI. It's like in 5 years, you may not see AI that's 50 times better. It might be 5 times better
Yeah.
just because we've hit the limit of Moore's law, which limits the capacity of AI. But with quantum computing, that's going to be the next revolution. I think you're going to see stronger prevailing trends in biomedical engineering, quantum computing. A lot of these applications, robotics, like human AI or Figure, they just rolled out their first sold units. And so now you're going to start seeing humanoids walking around the world delivering packages. You're going to see, them in warehouses and all this stuff in the next 10 years.
Hmm.
I think that's where you're going to see the application of AIs as these, legacy applications, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's not so much the self-driving vehicles; it's the self-walking robots who've got to navigate, going in, opening a gate, walking downstairs, avoiding the dog and the child's bicycle that's left on the driveway, and that sort of stuff. That'll be
You
interesting.
know, when I was 22, I just like tinkering with. I actually have one of my Raspberry Pis right here that I'm just working on. I invented the world's first smartwatch
Hmm.
before Apple did it. I made it in my bedroom. I sold about 200 of them for about $80 each, and was like, oh, this is a fun hobby,
Yeah.
and I didn't think about it. And at the same time, I created a robot that would put my dishes away, put it from this because my partner in the time we'd always getting in these arguments about putting the dishes away.
Yeah.
And so I made this robot that used very rudimentary AI, but AI nonetheless. And it was able to put away dishes. I taught it to fold clothes. And I was like, oh, this is a fun hobby, I was like, oh, this is just something fun. I was working in investment banking at the time on Wall Street, working
Yeah.
80 hours a week, and I was like, oh, these are just hobby projects. I'm not going to make a business out of them. 2 years later, Pebble launches their smartwatch on Kickstarter and make raise $200 million. This figured out AI, they've raised over $2 billion. And
Mm-mm.
I think what the reality is that it's not about creating fun things, it's about execution, right? And
Yes.
I remember just doing that stuff. And my partner at the time, she's like, "You're crazy." Like I was not crazy, but like, like it's like
Making a
our
robot to
apartment's like
fold
a
your
lab.
shirts.
Yeah, it's like on our part. I'm like, I don't want to fold clothing. Like, I'm just gonna make a robot do it. And she's like, she was like, yeah, I was dipping and making my own copper circuit boards by printing on a inkjet paper and then dissolving the paper and then dissolving the copper in the super toxic chemicals that I had a party and someone knocked it over and it burnt through the wood floor like the
Oh my
puddle just went
God.
and she was like, you gotta stop doing this stuff. I was like, all right, whatever. But I think the lesson to be learned is, go experiment. I think, you find problems in your life and, invest in those problems, like what you said, right? If you're using Netflix, go invest in it. If you just want to spend time, if you want a smartwatch, go invest in Apple, right?
Mm, mm. I'm thinking like because I know you like to tinker, and there's people who are working on these projects like the DAOs and things like that, where they're not technically getting paid for improving Bitcoin's code. But if you own enough
Yeah.
Bitcoin, you'll do it because you love the project. And if the project gets better, then obviously the rising tide floats all boats. So I guess that was what I was thinking of because there's a lot of coders and people who could work together on AI. And rather than making Sam Altman another $1 billion, what if we got a whole bunch of people who are like, you could create your AI that you've made, and then someone else comes in and goes, I can make it a little bit better, and someone else comes in and goes, I can make it a little bit better, and then having this community run thing that's going to be the alternative to the seven dominant companies.
Yeah, there's a ton of open source AI platforms already out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a competing one called Llama, LLAMA. You can download it. There's actually NVIDIA just released. I don't have it, but it's the same size as this.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is called the Jetson Nano, and you can run fully fledged AI on a little piece like that
Yeah.
that can run just crazy, crazy AI, right? So embedded AI, put AI on drones and cars, all that stuff. But yeah, there's amazing open source, and yeah, we should definitely collaborate on building those applications. Because I don't, my personal thing is that building AI from scratch is so difficult because you have to train it and you need like a PhD. I've built AIs for video games and stuff, and you can use TensorFlow. There's a lot of things you can do, but there's so many open source things you can do out there that would be better for, to start out with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the new Jetson Nano NVIDIA development kit is incredible. I can't wait. They're like $250. It runs off like 12 volt of power.
Yeah.
It's got like, a million cores or something crazy. You know what I mean? So it's like, the future's here. It's just about the applications.
Mm, mm. But apart from putting away the dishes and folding the clothes, what other applications can we look forward to, mate?
What do you mean?
Well, if someone buys one of these $250 things, what can they actually do with it apart from
Oh
chat
yeah.
to it like ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the application of it, right? Like if you put it on a drone, it could be autonomous now. If you put it in a car, it can, use visual AI to tell you, whose houses you're passing, what their names are. You can look them up online, do visual recognition of faces,
Mhm.
optimize space, optimize coding. Um, there's just any unstructured data, you know, real world data. It can follow migratory patterns, you can hook it up to really anything. I think that's the hard part, right? Is like, how do you create something that does creates value, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very cool. I think I sent you some pictures yesterday that I took on the Meta glasses. So the Meta glasses look like
Oh yeah, I saw those.
the Apple virtual reality headset looks like a giant snorkel mask. It's really bloody obvious that you're wearing something that's unnatural. Whereas these are just like a pair of Ray-Bans or headliners or whatever. And it's got a little camera built in, so you can take snapshots while you're out and about. And for me, I've got a little granddaughter, right? And if you pull out your phone, like you're going to take a picture of it, she strikes a pose like trying to be cute rather than just being natural and candid. But you can take a couple of pictures on your glasses, and she doesn't really realize that she's having a photo taken, so she doesn't act unnaturally. It's good to be able to take pictures while I'm riding a motorbike, and while I'm driving in the car, particularly if someone cuts me off. You better believe it. I'm going to take a picture of your license plate if you cut me off. Being able to do that hands free, but that was just the fun
Yeah.
part for me, is being able to take pictures all the time without having to pull my phone out of my pocket and put it in front of my face. It does, for privacy concerns, it does have a little light that tells people when you're recording or taking pictures, and you can't cover that up. If you try and cover up the light, it just won't work. So there's no creepy guy in the gym who's taking pictures of girls while they're exercising or anything like that. It can't be done. But the AI inside of those things, like I've tried to capture a couple of pictures, and it thinks that I want it to tell me what I'm looking at. And I can say, what bird is that? And it'll go, oh, you're looking at a swallow,
Yeah.
and behind it is a table, and there's some artificial grass, and there's some trees. And the other day I said, what am I looking at? And I was looking at a particular sign that was written in Japanese, and I wanted it to translate for me. But it said, oh, you're looking at a walkway, and it seems like you're in a coastal area. And I was like a block from the beach. I was like, how the hell did it know? It's very, very interesting, the
Yeah.
artificial intelligence in these things. And for I've got a friend who's blind. So obviously, not only
Mm.
translation, but what am I looking at? Where am I facing? Directional navigation, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of applications out there. For people who have got disabilities, AI could be brilliant. But there's so many applications that I haven't thought of. Like what's beyond the beyond? I think we had this
Yeah,
conversation
I
a
think
couple of weeks ago.
yeah, and my last thought is I saw this other company who literally just used an open source AI where it would take on their phone, they built an app that you could take it and show your what you're eating, and
Yeah.
then it would tell you the calories.
Oh my God.
And they did no work. They
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
just used open source AI on it. It
Yeah.
would look up a picture, it would tell you what the food is, and it would just look up how much calories that is.
Yeah.
And they sold that within a year and a half for like $500 million.
That's incredible. Because it's handy,
So just
right?
silly
People want
things
to
like
know.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
People want to know
Absolutely.
silly things like that. And the founder, it was a friend of mine. Yeah, I worked with him in New York for a little bit, and he was going off and building this app. And I was like, yeah, man, that seems like a cool idea. I don't know anyone that would use that, but like, cool, whatever. But yeah, he got it out there, and he didn't even, I don't think he really raised much money. Like, he
Mm,
just built it in like 2 weeks and
mm,
launched it. And then it took him like, he did it on the side for like 6 or 8 months. Like he
yep.
wasn't really promoting it or anything, but as soon as he got, it out there, it was trending and he put I think his big growth hack was he would post on Reddit every day about it.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I mean, this is
So there,
when I was a little kid, there was no such thing as the internet. If you wanted to start a business, forget about it. You have to go to business school, and you have to get this, and you have to register a business, and you have to do this and get patents and whatnot. Nowadays, you just open a Shopify store or open an Amazon store, or jump onto eBay, and you're automatically, any kid with a smartphone, a $50 smartphone doesn't need to be a good one. Anywhere in the world, in a third world country, you can be automatically
yeah.
selling your idea to a global audience. And I think like you had a couple of great ideas when you're in your 20s that you didn't carry to the market. And I'm sure there's everybody out there is going, oh, I invented this and I did this and I had an idea for that. And then a few years
Yeah.
later, it came out and it was everywhere, you know. So there's those things
Yeah.
about the discipline,
And,
but also
and
being in the right place at the right time, right?
the,
We've got
yeah,
to
exactly. And I
follow through.
remember doing all that stuff and yeah, because I surrounded myself with non-creatives, they were like, "Oh, this is weird. This is odd. Like, why are you doing this?" Right? And now I'm surrounding myself with founders and other people starting businesses, and they were like, "Yeah, dude, if I was around, I would have definitely jumped in and gone all in with you." And I was like, "Oh shit." So you really got to not only be disciplined, but surround yourself with the right people. I think there's an adage that you become the five people you spend the most time with.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you hang out with people who are lazy and not go-getters, well, shit, man. I hate to break it to you, that's what you're going to become, right?
You said before, Kevin,
But
um,
yeah, anyway,
find
well,
five
this was a
people.
great podcast, really great stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to hit you on something. You said before, find five people that love you and get advice from them. But what if those five people are lazy and they're not go-getters? So,
Well, maybe don't ask him for business advice then.
yeah. Or find someone who's got
But
what you
like,
want and ask them how to get it. But
yeah,
I'd put one caveat on that because there's some people who work, 160 hours a week and they've got lots of toys or lots of money, but they don't spend any time with their family. They've got a trail of failed relationships and their children don't speak to them. So before you say to the person, I want to have what you're having, check out to see how happy they are first. Because there's plenty of monks with no money who are a lot happier than the billionaire who's got a billion toys and no family. So yeah,
yeah.
choose
And
your mentors
life
wisely.
is, yeah, and life is short. Be bold, go out, do the thing, like don't sit around, watch YouTube, go do fun things, be a creator, and good things always happen.
I think that's great life advice, mate. Thank
Yeah,
you.
right.
Look forward
Uh,
to having the next couple of guests on. Hive Mapper. I'm not sure what the other one is after that. We might try and see if we can get someone to talk about BitTensor, NVIDIA, AI. It seems to be a recurring theme, and
yeah.
we'll see what we can do.
All right, great. Well, thank
Good
you for
chatting
your
to you.
time today, Jeremy.
Thank you.
All right. Cheers, mate.